The weather has gotten darker and colder. I thought it might be a good time for a story. Once, many seasons ago, there lived in the moors of southwest England a mighty hunter known as Bowerman. Bowerman was a large man. His hands were the size of peat shovels. His frame was massive, and he was possessed of the strength of 10 men. He is said to have wrestled a bear to win a wager, and was able to toss a full cask of mead across the river with one hand tied behind his back. Bowerman not only possessed a strong body, but he also possessed a kind heart. He fed the poor, helped those less fortunate, and gave money to the orphanage. For this, Bowerman was popular and well liked. Now, there were witches in the moors on those days, and one coven in particular was led by a witch named Elvira. Now Elvira was an evil, cackling thing who sold her soul to the devil for her powers, and she held the people in the land in thrall, fearful of her dark magics. But because Bowerman had such a kind and fearless heart, he alone was free of Elvira's spells, and dismissed any fearful talk of the coven as mumbo-jumbo. This jovial attitude set many of the moorfolk to ease, and as such lessened the influence of the coven upon them. This, of course, angered the witches, but they were also fearful of Bowerman due to his massive strength and his pack of frightful hunting dogs. One night, while hunting on the eastern side of the moor with his hounds, a large hare bolted from the underbrush and into the path of Bowerman's pack. With a whoop and a holler, he set the hounds on the trail. Over rock and under bush, the chase continued on until they suddenly reached a clearing. In this clearing, Bowerman spotted a coven of witches. They were gathered round a large bubbling cauldron in ceremony, and the hare turned and bolted directly at this gathering, and through the very center of their circle. Now, seeing an opportunity to disrupt and annoy them, Bowerman urged his hounds and his mount onward, directly into the ceremony. The hounds scattered the witches, and in the confusion, Bowerman kicked over the bubbling cauldron, exclaiming, "Mumbo jumbo, now who's all a-muddling?" And with that, Bowerman and the hounds were off down the valley, continuing their hunt. The witches were incandescent with rage. This time Bowerman had gone too far and needed to be taught a lesson. They hatched a plan to deal with him once and for all, and they set about preparing their trap. A few hours later, Bowerman and his hounds were returning under the light of the full moon. They had had a successful hunt when yet another hare, the largest Bowerman had ever seen, sprang from the underbrush. The hounds strained against their bindings, demanding to be let loose to hunt. Bowerman let them free, and the hunt began anew. This large hare, with white fur that shone like the light of the moon itself, took off like a shot, and always managed to stay but a few scant steps ahead of the hounds. Bowerman drew his bow and fired arrow after arrow at this hare, but it managed to evade each shot until his quiver was empty. Enraged, that this animal had managed to elude him and outrun his hounds, Bowerman swore that he would chase this hare until one of them fell. Around and around the moors the chase went. Every time Bowerman managed to corner the creature, the hare found a way to escape. This went on for hours. When his horse gave out and fell, Bowerman continued on foot. As his hounds began to tire and slow, Bowerman left them behind, and the chase continued. Finally, Bowerman saw the hare slowing down as it began to climb the tor just ahead. Sensing his opportunity was now at hand, Bowerman summoned up his strength to climb the tor as fast as he could. But when he reached the top, he saw the hare was gone, replaced by the form of Libera, who had been given the power to change herself into any animal she wished by the devil. Bowerman was quickly encircled by the entire coven, shrieking and cursing. Without his hounds and without his arrows, he felt fear creep into his heart. For the first time in his life, the fear broke his immunity to witchcraft, and he was cursed. He felt himself jerked upward, as if a string attached to his head was being pulled tightly, but his feet were stuck to the ground and could not be moved. He felt his limbs become heavier and heavier until he could no longer move them. He opened his mouth to curse the witches, but no sound escaped his lips. He could hear the sound of the rushing wind and the chanting of the coven, and he grew even more afraid. And just as his eyes dimmed and went dark, he could see his pack of hounds whimpering and mewling, transforming into stone. And he then looked at his own body, saw the skin stiffening, hardening, darkening, finally cracking, as he himself was transformed. He tried to scream, but he could not. And then he saw no more. He had been transformed into a great granite thing resembling a stack of rocks perched at the top of a hill. When word reached the moorfolk of Bowerman's fate, they grew angry and were able to shake off their fear. With forks and torches, they descended upon the witches' grove and rooted them out, chasing them off on their broomsticks as they headed across the bay, north towards Wales. Despite the defeat of the coven, Bowerman remained transformed. Struck, blind, mute, senseless, he could only stand there through all the centuries to come, knowing only his bottomless fear. But it is said that on a foggy, moonless night, if you listen closely, you can hear Bowerman and his hounds out on the moors, hunting for their prey. This story was requested by my dear friend Keith Bowerman, and if you travel out to Dartmoor in a national park in Devon, England, you can in fact find a rock formation known as Hound Tor, which is said to be the remains of Bowerman's hounds. About a mile away, near the village, you can find a 21.5-foot tall granite outcropping called Bowerman's Nose. Geographically speaking, it is believed that this formation is the remains of a tor, which had since collapsed and eroded away. Or perhaps it is the remains of the mighty hunter Bowerman, mute in his eternal torment, perched on the hill where fate got up to him so many years ago.